Summer, 43 years after the death of Christ. The coast of Kent. 4 Roman legions stood on a narrow beach beneath a gray and sullen sky, their sandaled feet pressing into wet gravel for the very first time. Behind them, the channel still churned with warships and transport vessels offloading soldiers, horses, and siege equipment. Ahead, dark forests rose silent and motionless beyond the shoreline. No warriors waited on the sand, no spears came flying from the tree line. The landing had gone completely unchallenged, but the silence only deepened the dread. Somewhere beyond those hills, the tribes of Britain were assembling. For nearly a century, this island had stood as Rome's unfinished business. Julius Caesar had set foot on these shores twice and departed with little more than stories and embarrassment. Now another emperor had dispatched another army to complete what Caesar had abandoned. The critical difference was that this time, Rome had no intention of withdrawing. The legions had crossed the edge of the known world, not to plunder, but to possess. They carried the full weight of an empire and the ambitions of a man who desperately needed a triumph to call his own. On that beach, beneath wheeling gulls and rolling mist, the future of Britain hung suspended. What would follow would reshape the island beyond recognition. For Rome, Britain had always been the prize that slipped away. Nearly a century before, in the summer of 55 BC, Julius Caesar had led 2 legions across the channel. He had landed, fought a handful of skirmishes, and retreated to Gaul before winter closed in. The following year he returned with a larger force, pressed inland, compelled several tribal kings to acknowledge Roman authority, and then departed again. He took hostages and pledges. He did not take the island. Britain remained free, a land of mist and legend beyond the reach of Roman dominion, and Caesar's expeditions became mere footnotes in his wider campaigns. The island had proven too distant, too hostile, and too expensive to hold. But Rome did not forget. In the decades that followed, Britain became a symbol, the land Julius Caesar could not subdue, the place where Roman ambition had stumbled. Traders crossed the channel, exiles sought refuge on British shores. Rebel kings who defied Rome found sanctuary in its forests. The island mocked the empire's claim to mastery over the known world. And every emperor who came after Caesar understood that sooner or later, someone would have to finish the work he had begun. That someone was Claudius. He had never expected the throne. He was a scholar and a historian, a man who stammered, walked with a limp, and had long been dismissed by his own family as unsuitable for power. His grandmother Livia rarely spoke to him directly. When the Praetorian Guard cut down his nephew Caligula in the turmoil of 41 AD, they discovered Claudius hiding behind a curtain deep inside the palace. They dragged him out, blinking and trembling, and proclaimed him emperor, not because he was formidable or commanding, but simply because he was the last surviving adult male of the imperial bloodline, and they needed a name to rally behind. The Senate held him in contempt and made little effort to conceal it. The army doubted his ability to command men in the field. His own household staff whispered that he was a figure of ridicule, an accident of history propped up on a throne too large for him. Claudius understood all of this with painful clarity. He was not blind to what people said, and he was not without intelligence. And so he knew with certainty what he needed. Not a symbolic skirmish against bandits on some neglected frontier, but something vast and permanent, something written into history in letters that could never be erased. He needed to be remembered not as the emperor who hid behind curtains, but as the emperor who accomplished what Julius Caesar himself had failed to finish. Britain offered precisely that. Remote enough to seem legendary, wealthy enough to justify the enormous cost, and unconquered enough to deliver the kind of glory that silenced critics and rewrote reputations. In the spring of 43 AD, Claudius gave the order. 4 legions would cross the channel. This time, Rome did not intend to withdraw. Command fell to Aulus Plautius, a senator with solid military credentials and the personal loyalty Claudius required above all else. Plautius would lead the invasion from the front. Claudius himself would travel to Britain only near the end, to claim the final moment of victory in person and return to Rome with a triumph no one could dispute. The plan was characteristically Roman in its bluntness: land, march, conquer, occupy. Once the legions crossed the water, there would be no negotiation and no withdrawal. Britain would become a province, or it would become a graveyard. But the peoples who called that island home had no intention of yielding without a struggle that would test the legions to their absolute limit. At the time of the invasion, Britain was not a unified nation. It was a mosaic of rival tribes, each governed by its own king, propelled by its own ambitions, and shaped by generations of mutual feuding. There was no single British people to negotiate with or to defeat, only a fractured landscape of competing loyalties and old wounds that Rome was shrewd enough to exploit. In the south and east, the Catuvillani dominated. A powerful confederation led by 2 brothers, Caratacus and Togodumnus, They controlled the fertile lands north of the Thames and had spent years tightening their grip on the lowlands, absorbing weaker neighbors, bullying wavering allies, and pushing their borders outward in every direction. Their capital was Camulodunum, a fortified settlement the Romans would one day rename Colchester. The brothers were proud, hardened warriors, and they had no love for Rome and no intention of bowing to it. Other tribes were less certain of their position. The Atrebates of the south had long maintained ties with Rome through trade and old diplomatic arrangements. Their exiled king, Verrica, had fled across the Channel and arrived at Claudius's court begging for military assistance against the Catuvalanes' encroachments. It was this appeal that gave Claudius the legal pretext he needed, a justification, however thin, for crossing the sea with 40,000 armed men. The invasion force assembled in Gaul through the early months of 43. 4 legions marched to the Channel coast, the 2nd Augusta, the 9th Hispana, the 14th Gemina, and the 20th Valeria. Each numbered roughly 5,000 heavily armored infantrymen, trained to march through any terrain, raise a fortified camp in a single evening, and kill with the relentless efficiency that had built the empire. Supporting them were auxiliary units from across the Roman world, Gallic and Germanic cavalry, archers, slingers, and engineers hauling siege equipment. The total force exceeded 40,000 soldiers, the largest army Rome had committed to a single campaign in a generation. But getting them onto ships proved harder than anyone anticipated. Rumors swept through the camps. Britain was a cursed island beyond the edge of the civilized world. The ocean separating it from Gaul was not a sea, but an abyss. The people there performed human sacrifice and practiced sorcery. When Plautius commanded the fleet to sail, the legions simply refused. The invasion stalled on the shore for days. Claudius dispatched his trusted freedman Narcissus to address the troops. The instant a former slave stepped forward to lecture battle-hardened legionaries, the men erupted in jeering laughter. But the laughter was the cure. The absurdity broke the grip of fear. The mutiny dissolved. Within days, the fleet set sail. They crossed in 3 divisions and grounded their transports on the sheltered shore at Rutupiae, later fortified and known as Richborough. The legionaries had prepared for a contested landing, shields locked and javelins braced. But the beach was deserted. The forests were still. 40,000 Roman soldiers set foot on British soil without losing a single man. Plautius did not celebrate. An unopposed landing told him only that the enemy had chosen a different kind of war. The Britons were not fools. They understood that meeting disciplined Roman formations on an open beach was a path to annihilation. Caratacus and Togodumnus had pulled their warriors inland, into the forests and hills where Roman organization counted for less, and knowledge of the terrain counted for everything. They would stretch the Roman supply lines and strike when the legions were exposed. The first major test came at the river Medway. The British had positioned thousands of warriors along the far bank. Spearmen, swordsmen, and charioteers lined along the heights, waiting for the Romans to attempt a crossing under fire. Claudius chose speed over caution. Under cover of dusk, he sent his Batavian auxiliaries, Germanic troops renowned for swimming fully armed, across the river far from the main British position. They emerged unseen, moved through the trees, and targeted not the warriors but the chariot horses, cutting them down and setting fire to supply wagons. Chaos erupted in the British camp. At dawn, the legions crossed. The battle ground on for 2 full days along the riverbanks, brutal, attritional fighting in which both sides took heavy losses. But on the second morning, when the Britons launched an all-or-nothing charge before the Romans could fully deploy, Plautius committed his reserves, stabilized the line, and drove the attackers back up the slopes. By midday it was over. The British army shattered and scattered. Togodumnus was killed at the Thames crossing shortly after, cut down while rallying his men near the water's edge. The road to Camulodunum lay open. Claudius arrived from Gaul in time to lead the final march to the tribal capital, accompanied by reinforcements and, reportedly, war elephants. Exotic beasts meant to stun and terrify. 11 tribal kings submitted without combat, kneeling before the emperor. Camulodunum opened its gates. Claudius stood in the conquered capital and declared victory. He remained in Britain for 16 days. The conquest of Britain had begun, and it would not stop. Caratacus fled west and would resist for another 8 years. The legions would push north and west for decades, fighting one hill fort at a time. But the campaign of 43 AD had shattered the spine of southern resistance and planted Rome's standard in British soil. The island that had defied the empire for a century had fallen in a single season. What Caesar had dreamed of and abandoned, Claudius had delivered. On the beaches of Kent, the surf still broke against the shore, but the Britain it touched would never be the same again.